The river flowed, indifferent, under the Mexican sun. But tranquility here often masked teeth. This time, the local fear had a name, AHUITZOTL. A legend whispered to use a child's heartbroken sob as bait before dragging its victims down, leaving only a chilling silence and a taste for specific, gruesome trophies. The agency's cold clinical interest in such, quote, aquatic anomalies was a familiar, unwelcome shadow falling over this new horror. My task: separate myth from the screams and silence a cry that had already claimed too many. The Mexican air, thick with humidity and the faint, brackish tang of decay from the Rio Xolotl, was a stark change from Aokigahara. An agency file, a cryptic mention of anomalous aquatic predation patterns, had drawn me to this remote, parched land. Each lead, however tenuous, was a step into the labyrinth of my lost past. Santa Magdalena de las Aguas was a collection of sun-baked adobe houses, gripped by a palpable silence born of fear. Children were absent, and the few adults I saw moved with furtive quickness, their eyes darting nervously towards the opaque, muddy waters of the Xolotl. My arrival in a battered pickup drew wary stares. Strangers were clearly an unwelcome anomaly here. The very air thrummed with an unspoken dread, a collective anxiety tied inextricably to the river, their lifeblood and, it seemed, their profound curse. I made my way to a dilapidated cantina. Inside, a handful of old men sat in the shadows, their conversations ceasing as I entered. Their faces, etched with a lifetime of hardship, held a deep-seated weariness that spoke of a terror long endured. "Buenas tardes," I offered. "Estoy buscando information." "I'm looking for information." A long silence followed. Finally, one of the men, older than the rest, his voice raspy, spoke. "No hay nada aquí para usted, señor. Nada más que tristeza." "There is nothing here for you, sir. Nothing but sadness." "I've heard stories," I pressed gently, "about things happening near the river. Disappearances." Their eyes, almost as one, flickered towards the river. Another man, younger, but with the same haunted look, muttered a single word, so low I almost didn't catch it. AHUITZOTL. The name hung in the stale air, AHUITZOTL. I'd researched it. An Aztec water demon, part dog, part monkey, with a fifth hand on its tail, said to lure victims with a child's cry, its gruesome preference being for their eyes, teeth, and fingernails. Folklore, I'd initially thought. A local boogeyman. But the palpable fear in this cantina, in this entire village, felt far too real for mere superstition. The old man sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "It is an old sorrow, señor. The river, it gives life, but it also takes." He made a slow sign of the cross. "And sometimes, it whispers a name before it does." His gaze met mine, filled with a grim warning. "Stay away from the water after dark, especially if you hear crying." His words, delivered with such somber certainty, sent an involuntary shiver down my spine, despite the oppressive heat. I left the cantina, the weight of their fear settling upon me. My own gaze was drawn to the Rio Xolotl. It flowed sluggishly, its surface like murky glass. It looked innocuous enough, yet I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that something ancient and malevolent lay hidden beneath its placid facade, listening, waiting. The agency's clinically detached phrase, anomalous aquatic predation patterns, suddenly sounded like a terrifyingly sterile euphemism. The hunt, it seemed, had already begun. The old man's warning echoed in my ears as I began my methodical sweep of the Rio Xolotl's banks the following morning. The sun climbed, already baking the parched earth, but a peculiar chill seemed to emanate from the sluggish brown water itself. My skepticism, a well-honed shield from years of dealing with the agency's deceptions and the world's inexplicable horrors, was firmly in place. Yet, the palpable fear of Santa Magdalena de las Aguas was a heavy counterweight. People didn't collectively hallucinate terror of that magnitude without a reason, however rooted in folklore it might seem. I started downstream from the village, moving slowly, my eyes scanning the muddy banks, the tangled roots of mangroves that clawed at the water's edge, and the dense, thorny scrub that pressed in on either side. The agency had dealt with its share of cryptids, creatures that defied easy classification, some engineered, some disturbingly natural. The thought that they might have cataloged something like the AHUITZOTL, or worse, had a hand in its presence here, was a persistent, unwelcome hum in the back of my mind. For hours, I found nothing beyond the usual detritus of a struggling riverside community. Discarded fishing nets, plastic bottles, the occasional sun-bleached animal bone. My logical mind began to assert itself. Perhaps the disappearances were due to strong currents, accidental drownings, or even mundane predators like crocodiles, their actions amplified by local superstition into the legend of a mythical beast. Then I found the first anomaly. Tucked into the V of a gnarled tree root, just above the current high water mark, was a child's sandal. It was small, made of brightly colored plastic, now faded and caked with dried mud. It wasn't just lost, it was wedged there with a peculiar force, as if something had tried to pull it further into the root system or away from the water. There were no other signs of a struggle, no scuff marks on the surrounding earth that might indicate a child playing and losing their footwear. Just the sandal, a silent, poignant testament. Further on, I discovered a series underscore of strange impressions in a patch of drying mud near a shallow inlet. They weren't animal tracks I recognized. They were too large for an otter or a dog, vaguely webbed, but with an odd, almost hand-like quality to some of the deeper indentations. And, disturbingly, there seemed to be a dragging mark leading from them towards the water, punctuated by smaller, claw-like divots, as if something with a prehensile limb had been used for leverage or to secure a grip. My skin prickled. The AHUITZOTL legend spoke of a hand on its tail. Coincidence? My scientific training urged caution, but the unease grew. I photographed everything, meticulously logging the locations in my notebook. The heat was becoming oppressive, the air thick and still. The only sounds were the buzz of insects, and the occasional plop of something unseen falling into the river. Later that day, as dusk began to settle and the light took on an orange, dusty hue, I sat concealed in a thicket overlooking a bend in the river, a spot where several villagers had claimed to have heard strange noises. The river transformed as darkness crept in. The familiar sounds of the day gave way to a different chorus, the chirping of crickets, the croaking of frogs, and something else, a series of low, guttural clicks, and a soft, almost sighing gurgle that seemed to emanate from beneath the water's surface. It wasn't the sound of fish, nor the movement of the current against the bank. It was rhythmic, almost purposeful, and deeply unsettling. It wasn't the infamous cry yet, but it was enough to make the hairs on my arms stand on end. I attempted to speak with a few more villagers, those who hadn't immediately shut their doors at my approach. Most were too terrified to offer anything coherent, their stories rambling and filled with superstitious embellishments. But one woman, her eyes hollow with a grief that felt far too fresh, told me of her nephew who had vanished 2 weeks prior while playing near the river's edge at twilight. "He heard a kitten, senor," she whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. "A little kitten, crying for its mother. He went to look." She couldn't finish, her voice choked by sobs. A kitten, not a child. The detail was specific and chilling. The AHUITZOTL, it seemed, was an adaptable mimic. My initial skepticism was eroding, chipped away by the silent evidence of the sandal and the strange tracks, by the palpable grief of the villagers, and by the unsettling sounds emanating from the murky depths of the Rio Xolotl. The map I'd begun to sketch in my notebook, marking the locations of disappearances and strange occurrences, was starting to paint a grim picture. This wasn't just folklore. Something predatory, something intelligent, and something terrifyingly real was haunting these waters. and it was hungry. The weight of Santa Magdalena's fear, coupled with the unsettling discoveries along the Rio Xolotl, pressed down on me. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by images of murky water and the echo of the grieving woman's words. My own past, a tapestry of violence, loss, and the agency's cold manipulations, felt uncomfortably close in this place of raw, unadulterated terror. Each new investigation was a reminder of the life I'd lost and the constant solitary battle I now waged. I spent the next day meticulously reviewing my notes and the scant historical records I could find online about the AHUITZOTL legends specific to this region. The core elements were consistent: the luring cry, the hand on the tail, the preference for eyes, teeth, and fingernails. Some accounts even described its fur as dark and slick, bristling with sharp spines when angered, and its ability to create sudden, localized whirlpools or waves to disorient its prey. The more I read, the less it sounded like a mere beast, and more like a perfectly adapted, terrifyingly intelligent predator. The pressure from the villagers was unspoken but immense. They saw me as an outsider, perhaps even a fool for daring to pry into matters best left to God and the river's dark whims. Yet, in their wary eyes, I also saw a desperate, flickering ember of hope. They were trapped, their lives dictated by the unseen terror in the water. If I could offer them even a sliver of respite, a concrete answer, it was a risk worth taking. That evening, I decided to patrol a section of the riverbank deemed particularly dangerous, a place where 2 children had vanished within the last year. The moon was a slender crescent, offering little illumination, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming night jasmine, a cloyingly sweet fragrance that did little to mask the underlying tension. I moved with practiced silence, my senses heightened, every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, registering with sharp clarity. For hours there was nothing but the usual nocturnal chorus of the riverside. Then it began. Faintly at first, carried on the almost imperceptible breeze, I heard it. A sound that made the blood run cold despite the humid night. It was the unmistakable sound of a child crying, not a distressed wail, but a soft, whimpering sob, filled with a heartbreaking loneliness that tugged at something primal within me. It seemed to come from a dense thicket of reeds further downstream, right at the water's edge. My hand instinctively went to the pistol holstered at my hip, a .45 I'd acquired after Aokigahara. My training screamed at me, lure, ambush, deception, yet the sound was so utterly convincing, so laden with pathos, that for a dangerous moment I felt an almost overwhelming urge to investigate, to offer comfort. The memory of the woman's story about her nephew and the kitten flashed through my mind, a vital anchor to reality. I forced myself to stay put, hidden in the shadows of a large ceiba tree, and listened. The crying continued, punctuated by small, choked gasps. It was a masterful performance, perfectly pitched to elicit sympathy and override caution. I could see how easily someone, especially a concerned parent or a curious child, could be drawn in. Then I noticed the water. Even in the dim light, I could see subtle, unnatural ripples spreading outwards from the area of the reeds, despite the lack of any discernible wind. It was as if something large were subtly shifting its weight just beneath the surface. The legends mentioned the AHUITZOTL'S ability to manipulate water. Slowly, cautiously, I raised the digital recorder I'd brought, its microphone pointed towards the source of the sound. If this was a lure, I wanted a record of it. As I focused, the crying seemed to intensify slightly, almost as if it sensed my attention. A shiver traced its way down my spine. This wasn't just an animal mimicking a sound. There was an intelligence behind it, a chilling awareness. The night wore on, the luring cry ebbing and flowing, a constant nerve-wracking soundtrack to the darkness. I didn't dare approach. My objective was observation, information gathering. But the experience had solidified my belief. The AHUITZOTL was real, and its methods were as insidious as the legends claimed. This wasn't just a hunt. It was a psychological game, and the stakes were fatally high. The sun rose, painting the muddy waters of the Rio Xolotl with strokes of pale gold and rose, a deceptive beauty that belied the horrors of the night. The luring cry had ceased with the first hint of dawn, as if the creature responsible knew its power waned with the receding darkness. I retreated from my observation post, joints stiff, mind replaying the unsettling sounds and the subtle disturbances in the water. The recording I'd captured was chillingly clear, the fabricated sobs perfectly mimicking a distressed child. It was undeniable proof of a highly evolved, predatory intelligence. My conviction that the AHUITZOTL was a tangible threat, not just a figment of folklore, had solidified. The task now was to convince the villagers not just of its existence, but that something could be done. More importantly, I had to formulate a plan to protect them, to confront this water fiend. The agency's file had offered no weaknesses, only cold statistics of its lethality. I was operating in the dark, relying on fragmented legends and my own instincts. I spent the morning speaking with the village elder, the old man from the cantina, whose name was Matteo, showing him the strange tracks I'd photographed, playing back a snippet of the recorded cry, carefully so as not to cause undue panic. I laid out my concerns. His weathered face grew grimmer with each piece of evidence. He didn't need convincing of the AHUITZOTL's reality. He'd lived with its shadow his entire life. But the idea that an outsider might actively seek to confront it was a novel, perhaps even terrifying concept. "It is the river's spirit, Signor," he said, his voice low. "Ancient, hungry. It cannot be fought like a man or a beast. Perhaps not fought," I conceded, "but understood. Deterred. Its patterns can be learned." As we spoke, a commotion erupted from the direction of the river. Shouts, a woman's terrified scream. My blood ran cold. Matteo and I exchanged a grim look and hurried towards the sounds. We arrived to a scene of chaos. A small group of women who had been washing clothes at a shallow, relatively open stretch of the riverbank were scrambling back, their faces pale with terror. One young woman was being supported by two others, sobbing hysterically, pointing a trembling finger towards the water. "Miguelito!" she cried, her voice hoarse. "He was just there, playing with a pebble, then the water, it pulled him." My gaze snapped to the river. About 10 feet from the bank, the surface was churning violently, a localized vortex of muddy water spinning with unnatural speed and force. And for a horrifying instant, I saw it. Not the full creature, but a glimpse that seared itself into my memory. A thick, dark, almost serpentine tail, glistening wetly, with what looked disturbingly like a slender, 5-fingered hand at its tip, digits flexing as it thrashed beneath the surface. It was trying to drag something under. There was no time to think, only to act. I sprinted towards the commotion, shouting for the women to stay back. As I neared the edge, the thrashing intensified. I could see the small, dark head of a child, no more than 6 or 7, struggling feebly against the powerful current, his cries swallowed by the churning water. Without hesitation, I plunged into the river. The water was surprisingly cold, the current far stronger than it appeared. The muddy bottom offered little purchase. I fought my way towards the vortex, the image of that grotesque, hand-tipped tail burning in my vision. The AHUITZOTL. Real, and in the process of claiming another victim. The creature, whatever its full form, was powerful. The suction it created was immense. As I reached the struggling boy, Miguelito, I saw a flash of dark fur, a glint of what might have been an eye, red and malevolent, just beneath the surface. I grabbed the child's arm, pulling with all my strength, trying to break the creature's hold. Suddenly, a powerful wave, generated from the center of the vortex, slammed into me, disorienting me, filling my mouth and nose with gritty river water. The hand-tipped tail lashed out, narrowly missing my face, its touch slick and cold. I could feel the raw, brutal strength of the unseen creature fighting against me. This wasn't just an animal. It was a force of nature, perfectly adapted to its deadly domain. My brief, terrifying glimpse confirmed the legends with horrifying accuracy. My Huang skepticism was not just challenged, It was drowned in the murky, predatory waters of the Rio Xolotl. The murky water of the Rio Xolotl closed over my head for a terrifying moment before I fought my way back to the surface, sputtering and gasping. Miguelito still clutched tightly in my arm. The vortex had dissipated as suddenly as it had formed, the grotesque tail vanishing beneath the churning brown depths. The AHUITZOTL, disturbed or perhaps momentarily sated, had retreated. For now, atop his soda, I hauled the terrified, choking child back towards the bank, my muscles screaming in protest against the current and the adrenaline coursing through my system. The women rushed forward, pulling us both from the river's greedy grasp. Miguelito was alive, coughing up muddy water, but otherwise miraculously unharmed, save for a few minor scratches and an overwhelming terror that would likely haunt him for years. The young woman, his mother, clutched him to her chest, her sobs of relief mingling with a renewed wave of fear. My own relief was short-lived, quickly replaced by a grim resolve. The encounter, as brief and chaotic as it had been, had provided invaluable, terrifying confirmation. The hand-tipped tail, the unnatural manipulation of water, the sheer predatory force, it was all real. The legends weren't just stories. They were warnings, diluted by time but rooted in a horrifying truth. As Mateo and the other villagers tended to Miguelito and his mother, I stood dripping by the riverside, my mind racing. The agency's file had mentioned high success rate in predation. I now understood why. This creature was an apex predator in its environment, intelligent and equipped with abilities that seemed almost supernatural. My initial plan of mere observation and deterrence felt woefully inadequate. This wasn't something that could be simply scared away. The rest of the day was spent in tense discussion with Mateo and a few of the braver village men. My near drowning and the rescue of Miguelito had, at least, earned me a measure of their trust, though their fear of the AHUITZOTL remained deeply ingrained. I explained what I had seen, piecing together its tactics, the luring cry to draw victims close, the localized vortex or wave to disorient and incapacitate, and the powerful prehensile tail to drag them under. It hunts mostly at twilight and during the night, Mateo confirmed, his voice heavy. But as you saw, senor, when it is hungry, or when an opportunity presents itself, it will strike even in daylight. We needed a plan, and quickly. The AHUITZOTL had been thwarted, but it was likely angered, and would undoubtedly try again. The thought of another child being taken, of those gruesome preferences for eyes and teeth and nails being fulfilled, was unthinkable. My lost memories of the agency, of the creatures I'd faced, flickered at the edge of my consciousness. There had to be something in that fragmented knowledge, some instinct, some forgotten protocol that could help. Our resources were limited. The village possessed little more than machetes, fishing spears, and a few ancient, unreliable firearms. My own .45 felt like a pea shooter against such a foe. Direct confrontation in its element, the water was suicidal. We had to draw it out, or at least neutralize its primary advantages. As night began to fall, an oppressive blanket settling over Santa Magdalena, a grim plan began to take shape. We would set a watch, a more organized and armed one than my solitary patrols. We would also attempt to create a deterrent, something to make the immediate vicinity of the village less appealing to the creature. Fire was a universal repellent, but difficult to maintain safely along a wide stretch of riverbank. Noise, perhaps? Or something that disrupted its senses? I found myself pacing the riverbank as darkness deepened. The sounds of the night, the crickets, the frogs, the distant howl of a coyote, now overlaid with a new, heightened sense of menace. Every ripple on the water's surface, every splash in the distance sent my nerves jangling. The AHUITZOTL was out there, lurking in the murky depths, its presence a palpable weight. I thought of my Zippo, Eleanor. Its flame had offered some protection in Aokigahara. Could fire, or even intense light, be a weakness here? The creature was primarily aquatic, its eyes likely adapted to murky, low-light conditions. A sudden, bright illumination might disorient it. It was a slim hope, but it was something. The agency case, back in my modest rented room, felt like a silent accusation. They had known about creatures like this, studied them, perhaps even weaponized them. Had they ever found a weakness for the AHUITZOTL? The inert data slate was a maddening dead end. Tonight, I wasn't just an investigator or an observer. I was a guardian, however reluctant, however ill-equipped. The long night by the river of death stretched before me, pregnant with threat. And as I stared out at the dark, inscrutable water, I knew the AHUITZOTL was also watching, waiting, its ancient hunger stirring. The true test was about to begin. The night air was thick with a tension that was almost breathable. Under a moonless, star-dusted sky, the Rio Xolotl lay like a coiled serpent of black glass, its surface betraying none of the horrors that lurked beneath. We had set up a perimeter of sorts, small, carefully tended fires at intervals along the village's main river access points, their flickering light, casting, dancing, distorted shadows on the water and the dense foliage. Mateo and a handful of the most resolute village men, armed with machetes and an ancient shotgun, kept a nervous watch with me. Their fear was a palpable presence, but so was a grim, newfound determination. Miguelito's near-death experience had galvanized them. My own senses were stretched to their limit. Every nocturnal sound, the plop of a fish, the rustle of reeds, the distant cry of a nightbird, was a potential threat. I clutched my .45, its weight a cold comfort, though I knew it would be of limited use against a creature primarily in its element. My more potent weapon, I hoped, was a high-powered waterproof searchlight I'd salvaged from my gear, its beam capable of cutting through the deepest gloom. Hours passed in watchful silence, broken only by the crackle of the fires and the low, anxious murmurs of the men. The luring cry, the one that had chilled me to the bone the previous night, did not manifest. Perhaps our preparations, the fires, and the increased human presence were acting as a deterrent. Or perhaps the AHUITZOTL was simply biding its time, observing, learning. Then, just as a sliver of false dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon, it happened. Not with a cry, but with a sudden violent eruption of water near the central washing stones, the very spot where Miguelito had been attacked. A geyser of muddy river water shot upwards, accompanied by a sound like a great beast clearing its throat, a deep, guttural roar that was both animalistic and chillingly intelligent. The nearest fire hissed and sputtered as water cascaded over it. The men cried out in alarm, stumbling back. I snapped the searchlight on, its intense beam slicing through the pre-dawn murk, focusing on the roiling water. And there, caught in the stark white glare, I saw it, the AHUITZOTL. It was larger than I'd imagined, its body thick and muscular, like an oversized, demonic otter, covered in dark, slick fur that seemed to absorb the light. Its head was broad, with small, intensely red eyes that glittered with malevolent cunning, fixed directly on me, on the source of the light. Its snout was elongated, lined with rows of needle-sharp teeth, bared in a silent snarl. And the tail was a nightmarish appendage, long and powerful, ending not in a fluke, but in a grotesque, perfectly formed hand, its dark fingers flexing, clenching, reaching. The creature was momentarily stunned by the sudden, intense light, its red eyes blinking against the glare. It let out another guttural roar, a sound of fury and surprise. This was my chance. "Now!" I yelled to the men, though my voice was nearly drowned out by the creature's roar and the crashing water. They responded with a ragged volley of action. Machetes flashed, though none dared get close enough to strike. The ancient shotgun boomed, its pellets peppering the water harmlessly wide of the mark. Their efforts were more a show of defiance than a genuine threat to the beast. The AHUITZOTL, recovering quickly, unleashed its power. With a mighty sweep of its body and tail, it generated a wave, not as large as a vortex, but powerful enough to surge up the bank, dousing another fire and sending the men scrambling further back. It used the chaos to its advantage, diving, its dark form a fleeting shadow beneath the turbulent surface. I kept the searchlight trained on the area, sweeping it back and forth, trying to track its movements. It was incredibly fast, agile in its element. I saw flashes of its dark fur, the glint of its red eyes, the disturbing articulation of its tail hand as it propelled itself through the water. Then it lunged. It burst from the water directly in front of me, a terrifying vision of teeth and claws, and that grasping tail hand, water streaming from its dark fur. Its fetid breath, a miasma of river mud and decaying fish, washed over me. I fired my .45 twice, point blank. The bullets thudded into its thick hide, eliciting a screech of pain and rage, but they didn't seem to slow it significantly. Its tail hand lashed out, aiming for my legs, trying to drag me into the water. I threw myself sideways, the hand closing on empty air, its sharp claws tearing through the fabric of my trousers. I scrambled back, firing again, the creature a whirlwind of furious motion and guttural roars. It was clear that killing it, or even seriously wounding it with the weapons at hand, was a near impossibility while it could retreat to the river. Our only hope was to drive it off, to make this hunting ground too dangerous, too unprofitable. Remembering the legends of its aversion, I fumbled for my Zippo, thankfully refilled, and with a desperate flick, ignited it. The small flame, combined with the intense beam of the searchlight still fixed on its eyes, seemed to have a more profound effect than the bullets. The AHUITZOTL recoiled, shaking its massive head, its red eyes blinking rapidly. It let out a frustrated, almost pained hiss. It hesitated for a crucial second, caught between its fury and an apparent discomfort with the combined light and flame. Then, with a final defiant roar, it spun, its powerful body crashing back into the Rio Xolotl, disappearing beneath the muddy surface in an explosion of churning water. Silence descended, broken only by our ragged breathing and the crackle of the remaining fires. The immediate threat was gone. But as I stared at the spot where the river demon had vanished, I knew this wasn't over. We had merely repelled it. The AHUITZOTL was still out there, wounded, enraged, and undoubtedly still hungry. The first rays of true dawn were painting the sky as an uneasy calm settled over the riverbank. The AHUITZOTL had retreated, but its terrifying presence lingered in the air, thick as the morning mist rising from the Rio Xolotl. My adrenaline was ebbing, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the throbbing pain from where the creature's tail hand had grazed my leg. Mateo and the other men were shaken but unharmed, their expressions a mixture of lingering terror and dawning, incredulous relief. We had faced the river demon, and for now we had survived. "It is gone, senor?" Mateo asked, his voice still hoarse, his eyes wide as he stared at the now placid surface of the river. "For now," I replied, my gaze sweeping the water. "But it's wounded, and creatures like that don't easily forget a challenge. It will be back, or it will find easier prey elsewhere." The immediate priority was to ensure the village remained vigilant. We reinforced the fires, and the men, emboldened by their survival, agreed to maintain a rotating watch. But I knew this was a temporary solution. We hadn't truly defeated the AHUITZOTL. We had merely made this particular hunting spot less appealing. As the sun climbed higher, I decided to investigate the area where the creature had been most active, near the washing stones. The water, though still murky, had settled. Cautiously, I waded into the shallows, my senses on high alert for any sign of its return. The ground beneath the water was soft mud, littered with smooth river stones. It was near a submerged tangle of ancient tree roots, close to where I'd first seen its tail hand snatching at Miguelito, that I found something. Not a lair, exactly. I suspected a creature like that would have multiple hiding spots along the river, but evidence. Caught amongst the gnarled roots, almost invisible against the dark, wet wood, were several long, dark strands of what looked like coarse fur or quills, some tipped with a faint, oily sheen. They were stiff, almost needle-like, and when I carefully extracted one, I noticed a tiny barb at its base, similar to a porcupine's quill. This confirmed the legends of its spiny fur, a defensive or perhaps even offensive adaptation. More disturbingly, wedged deeper within the roots, I found a small collection of objects that sent a chill through me despite the growing heat of the day. A few smooth, water-worn stones, several small animal teeth, likely from fish or rodents. And then, the gruesome trophies. A single child-sized human molar, surprisingly intact, and a collection of what appeared to be human fingernails, pale and brittle. The AHUITZOTL'S legendary preference was horrifyingly real. This wasn't just a predator killing for sustenance. There was a ritualistic, almost intelligent cruelty to its habits. My mind raced. Was this creature simply a biological anomaly, a hyper-evolved predator? Or was there something more to it, something that bordered on the supernatural, as the Aztec legends suggested? The way it manipulated water, its cunning mimicry, the almost sentient malice in its red eyes, these traits seemed to transcend simple animal instinct. And then, glinting dully in the mud just beyond the collection of macabre trophies, I saw it, a small, metallic object, partially buried. My heart gave a familiar, unwelcome lurch. With a growing sense of dread, I reached down and pulled it free. Ah! It was a dart. Not a tranquilizer dart from my agency case, but a smaller, more sophisticated type, with a slender, multifaceted tip designed for deep penetration and rapid toxin delivery. And etched almost microscopically onto its casing was the unmistakable, cold, geometric logo of the agency. My breath caught in my throat. The agency. Here, again. This wasn't just a random encounter with a legendary beast. They had been here. They had engaged with the AHUITZOTL. Had they been trying to capture it, study it, weaponize it? The dart suggested a more aggressive interaction than mere observation. Suddenly, the anomalous, aquatic predation patterns in their file took on a new, more sinister light. Were these patterns a result of the creature's natural behavior? Or had the agency's interference somehow agitated it, driven it to become more aggressive, more brazen in its attacks on the village? Had they, in their relentless pursuit of knowledge and power, inadvertently exacerbated the very threat they were supposedly investigating? The pieces began to click into place with a sickening certainty. The creature's unusual boldness, its attacks even in daylight, the almost targeted nature of some of its appearances. Perhaps it wasn't just hunger, but a reaction to being hunted, to being provoked by an entity far more technologically advanced than the local villagers. I stood there, in the shallows of the Rio Xolotl, the agency dart cold in my palm, the gruesome evidence of the AHUITZOTL'S kills nearby. The truth behind the curse of Santa Magdalena de las Aguas was far more complex, far more insidious than simple folklore. It was a tangled web of ancient legend, natural predation, and the cold, calculating interference of an organization that seemed to have its shadowy fingers in every dark corner of the world. And I, once again, found myself caught in the middle. The agency dart was a cold, hard piece of undeniable truth in my hand. It recontextualized everything: the AHUITZOTL'S aggression, the village's intensified fear, even my own presence here, drawn by their cryptic file. They hadn't just known about this creature, they had actively engaged it, perhaps even provoked it. The curse of Santa Magdalena de las Aguas might well have been amplified, if not outright instigated, by their meddling. I shared my discovery of the dart with Mateo, though I omitted its direct connection to the agency, merely stating it was evidence of other hunters, outsiders, who had likely agitated the beast. His weathered face darkened. The idea that human interference, not just ancient malevolence, had contributed to their suffering added a fresh layer of bitterness to their ordeal. Our immediate concern, however, remained the AHUITZOTL. While the dart hinted at a larger, more sinister picture, the creature itself was still a clear and present danger. We couldn't rely on the agency's failed attempt to neutralize it. We needed a more sustainable solution for the village. Over the next few days, we worked to fortify Santa Magdalena's defenses. This involved more than just maintaining fires. We cleared a wider perimeter along the vulnerable stretches of the riverbank, removing dense undergrowth that could provide cover for the creature. We also fashioned crude warning systems, lines strung with empty cans and bells, that might alert the villagers to any approach from the water. It wasn't foolproof, but it was something. A way for the community to reclaim a measure of control, a sense of agency against the terror that had ruled their lives. I also spent time studying the strands of fur or quills I'd recovered. Under a cheap magnifying glass I'd bought in a larger town miles away, the barbs were clearly visible. This suggested that direct physical contact with the creature, even a glancing blow, could be incredibly painful and difficult to dislodge. Another piece of the puzzle, another reason for its predatory success. AHUITZOTL'S, the AHUITZOTL did not reappear during those days, at least not in any overt way. Perhaps our confrontation had been enough to drive it to seek less challenging hunting grounds. Perhaps the lingering scent of smoke and human activity was a sufficient deterrent. Or perhaps, and this was a chilling thought, it was simply healing, waiting, its cunning mind plotting a new approach. The day came for me to leave Santa Magdalena. My supplies were dwindling, and the agency dart was a burning question that needed answers. Answers I wouldn't find in this remote corner of Mexico. Mateo and a small group of villagers saw me off. There were no grand farewells, just a quiet, solemn gratitude in their eyes that spoke more than words. Miguelito, clutching his mother's hand, gave me a shy, watery smile. "Vaya con Dios, señor," Mateo said, clasping my hand firmly. "You have given us back a piece of our river, a piece of our peace." I wished I could share his optimism fully. I had helped them, yes, for now. But the AHUITZOTL was still out there. And the agency, with its shadowy agenda, was a far more pervasive and insidious threat. As I drove away, the Rio Xolotl receding in my rearview mirror, I felt the familiar weight of my solitary existence. Each encounter, each monster faced, each clue uncovered, seemed to draw me deeper into a world of darkness and conspiracy. Aokigahara had left a scar on my mind, a chilling awareness of the power of concentrated sorrow and the thin veil between realities. The Rio Xolotl had left its own mark, a visceral understanding of ancient predatory cunning and a fresh burning indignation at the agency's reckless interference. The dart was tucked securely in my bag. It was another lead, another faint trail in the sprawling, convoluted mystery of my past and their present. Where it would lead, I didn't know, but I knew I had to follow it. The whispers of the forest, the luring cry from the river, these were just echoes of a larger, more dangerous game being played by forces I was only beginning to comprehend. The river's scar was not just on the land or on the people of Santa Magdalena, it was on me too. A reminder that some monsters were born of nature, some of legend, and some, perhaps the most dangerous of all, were made by men in sterile labs and shadowy boardrooms, their actions leaving ripples of terror that spread far beyond their intended targets. My hunt for answers, and for some semblance of justice, was far from over.